My mother kicked me out at 16 because her real kids were more important. Now that I'm an executive, she returned demanding $40K for my half-siblings. But I got a restraining order and her husband left her. I'm 33 years old. I work in upper management at a tech company, and what I'm about to tell you is basically why I haven't spoken to my mother in over a decade and why she now has a restraining order against her. I mean, she has an order that prohibits her from coming near me. I know it sounds heavy, and believe me, it is. But I need to get this out because what happened a few weeks ago still has me processing a ton of shit I thought I'd already dealt with. My mom had me when she was 20 years old. My biological father, if I can even call him that, left before I was born. Like he didn't even get to meet me. I grew up hearing different versions of why he left. Sometimes it was because he was too young, sometimes because he wasn't ready. But the truth is, he just didn't care enough about me to stick around. You know what I mean? During my early years, it was just my mom and me. We lived in a small apartment and she worked all the time. She'd pull double shifts at a restaurant and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. It wasn't an easy life, but it wasn't terrible either. You know, it was what it was. When I was like 8 years old, maybe just turned 8, my mom met Richard. He was a manager at an electronics store, had a stable job and a decent car, a blue Honda Accord that I remember perfectly because I thought it was the coolest car in the world at the time. At first, Richard was cool with me. He'd take me bowling on Sundays and help me with my math homework, and my mom seemed genuinely happy for the first time in a long time. They got married when I was 8. I think it was in October or November. I'm not completely sure, but I do remember it was cold, and I wore a suit that was a bit too big on me. Things were relatively normal for a few years. Richard never treated me badly. But he wasn't really like a real dad either, you know? He was more like an adult roommate who lived with us and sometimes paid attention to me. When I was like 12 years old, almost 13, my mom got pregnant with twins, a boy and a girl, and from the moment they were born, everything changed completely. It wasn't gradual. It was pretty obvious and quick. Suddenly, all the attention, all the money, all the time, everything went to the babies. And yes, I understand babies need attention. I'm not stupid, but it was different. It was like I had stopped existing overnight. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs were there. My mom started making comments about how much it cost to support me, about how I was big enough to take care of myself, about how the twins needed things, and money was tight. Richard stopped taking me anywhere, and basically only interacted with me to ask me to turn down the TV or clean my room. I went from having my own room to having to share a tiny space in the basement because the twins needed the room that was mine, and when I complained, my mom told me to stop being selfish, that they were babies and I was already big. What happened when I was 16 was what basically destroyed any relationship I could have had with my mom forever. It was a Saturday morning. I remember it was Saturday because I didn't have school, and I was planning to go to a friend's house later. My mom and Richard called me to the living room. The twins were playing on the floor with some colored blocks. And my mom said, "We need to talk to you about your future." I thought it was going to be a conversation about college or something like that, but no, it was much worse. Richard started by saying they'd been thinking a lot about the family's financial situation, and my mom continued, saying that with 2 young kids, the expenses were too much and they couldn't keep supporting me anymore, that I was already 16 and could get a job and fend for myself. I couldn't believe it. I literally sat there trying to process if this was a horrible joke or what. I asked my mom what she meant exactly, and she, with the most serious face in the world, told me she thought it would be better for everyone if I went to live with my grandparents or found another place, that they needed to focus on their real kids. And yes, she said real kids. Like what was I? A fake kid? Richard added that it wasn't anything personal, that it was just a practical decision, that they had to prioritize the twins because they were younger and needed more resources for their future. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I told them I was 16 years old, that I was still in school, that it was literally their legal responsibility to take care of me. And my mom just said my grandparents could take care of that she'd already talked to them and they agreed to take me in. Basically, they were kicking me out of the house to save money for my half-siblings. Can you believe it? They gave me 2 weeks to pack my things and get out. 2 weeks. Like I was a tenant who wasn't paying rent. I called my grandparents crying that same afternoon, and sure enough, my mom had already talked to them, but the version she gave them was that I wanted to move in with them because I didn't get along with Richard, which was a total lie. My grandparents, who are the most amazing people in the world, told me I could come live with them no problem, that I would always have a place in their home. I moved 2 weeks later with 3 suitcases and some boxes, leaving behind basically my entire childhood in that house where I clearly wasn't welcome anymore. Living with my grandparents was different. They treated me with love and supported me, but I was emotionally destroyed. I got a part-time job at a supermarket, worked after school and on weekends, and every cent I earned I saved. My mom would call me occasionally at first, but the conversations were superficial and always ended with her telling me the twins had done something cute or that they needed something new. Eventually, I stopped answering her calls and she stopped trying. When I graduated from high school, I applied for college, got some partial scholarships but not enough to cover everything, so I had to take out a student loan. My uncle, my mom's younger brother, was the one who co-signed the loan because my grandparents were already retired and didn't qualify. I worked throughout college, did night shifts at a warehouse, worked at the campus cafeteria, basically anything that would give me money to pay my expenses and not have to ask anyone for anything. I slept like 4 or 5 hours a night and lived basically on coffee and ramen. But I graduated with a degree in business administration and without owing my mom anything. After graduating, I cut all contact with my mom completely. I blocked her number, deleted her from all social media, and asked my grandparents and my uncle not to give her information about me. They respected my decision, though I think it hurt them a little, especially my grandparents, who have always been very family-oriented, but they understood why I needed to do that. I got my first a job at a tech company, started in a junior position but worked like crazy, did overtime, took all the difficult projects nobody else wanted, learned everything I could. In 5 years, I'd moved up to a management position, and by the time I turned 33, like 2 months ago, they gave me a promotion to upper management with a salary I honestly never thought I'd earn. This is where things got interesting. Turns out my uncle, who, as I mentioned, co-signed my student loan, and who I keep in touch with because he's good people, went to a family gathering last month. I think it was someone's birthday, and my mom was there. Apparently, she asked him about me, something she hadn't done in years, and my uncle, without thinking much about the consequences, told her I was doing really well, that I'd received a big promotion and was basically living comfortably. He didn't give specific details like my address or where exactly I worked, but he told her enough for her to know I was doing well, financially. A week later, on a Tuesday afternoon, I was at home after work when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there were my mom and Richard, standing at my entrance like nothing. Like more than 15 years hadn't passed since the last time I saw them. My mom looked older, obviously. She was like 53 years old at that point, and Richard also looked different, grayer and a bit heavier. I froze, literally didn't know what to say or do. My mom started with a forced hello and told me they needed to talk to me about something important. I was so shocked I let them in, which was probably a mistake, but part of me was curious to know what they wanted after so long. They sat in my living room, looking around my house, which is pretty nice. I have good furniture and decent decor, and I could see in their faces they were processing that I was indeed doing well. Richard got straight to the point. He told me the twins, who were now like 21 years old, were about to enter college and needed financial help. Specifically, they needed me to pay for their college education. Yes, you read that right. They were asking me to pay for college for the kids they kicked me out of the house for. The logic, according to my mom, was that I had the resources now and that as family we should help each other. That the twins were my siblings, and I should want the best for them. I felt the rage rising up my chest. I asked them if they were serious, if they really thought that after kicking me out at 16 years old, after more than 15 years without contact, they had the nerve to ask me for money. My mom started with a speech about how she raised me alone, about all the sacrifices she made for me, about how she fed me and gave me a roof for 16 years and now it was my turn to give back. I told her she chose to have me, that was her responsibility as a mother, not a favor she did me. And that besides she kicked me out specifically to give them a better life for the twins, so they should have saved for their education all this time. Richard tried to be reasonable, saying they weren't asking me to pay for everything, just to help, to contribute what I could. I told him no, that my answer was absolutely no, that they made the decision to prioritize them years ago and now they had to live with the consequences of that decision. My mom started crying, saying I was cruel. How could I deny this to my family, that the twins weren't to blame for what happened? The conversation got more and more heated. I told them to leave my house and never come back, that I didn't owe them anything and didn't want to know anything about them. My mom told me I'd regret this, that family was the most important thing, and someday I'd understand. I literally pushed them toward the door and locked it when they left. I stood there, shaking with rage and wanting to throw up. All those emotions I thought I'd processed came back all at once. I thought that was the end of it, but I was very wrong. I started receiving emails from my mom, long messages where she listed everything she'd done for me, every meal she gave me, every time she took me to the doctor, every dollar she spent on me during those 16 years. It was pure manipulation, trying to make me feel guilty for having boundaries and for refusing to rescue her from her own bad financial planning. I responded once, telling her to stop contacting me and that I was blocking her email, and I did. But she didn't stop there. Like 2 weeks ago, she showed up at my work. I don't know how she found out where exactly I worked. Maybe my uncle told her accidentally, or maybe she stalked me on LinkedIn. I have no idea. But there she was in the lobby of my building, demanding to speak with me. The receptionist called me, and when I went down and saw her there, dressed formally like it was an important business meeting, I knew this was going to be a disaster. She asked me for 5 minutes of my time, and I, like an idiot, agreed to talk to her outside the building. She told me she was desperate, that Richard had lost his job a few months ago, that they didn't have enough savings for the twins' college, that they'd applied for loans but didn't qualify for much. She begged me to reconsider, that it didn't have to be the whole cost of college, that with $30,000 or $40,000 they could make it work. $40,000. Like it was nothing. I told her my answer was still no, that she needed to leave and stop harassing me. She started screaming there on the street, in front of my office building, saying I was an ungrateful son, that she'd given me life, and this was how I repaid her. Several of my coworkers passed by and saw the scene. It was humiliating. I told her if she didn't leave right then I'd call security, and she finally left, but not before yelling at me that this wasn't over. What happened next was what really crossed the line. For a week ago, it was Friday night, and I was getting home from work when I saw her waiting for me at my entrance again. I tried to ignore her and get into my house, but she grabbed my arm, pulling me, telling me I had to listen to her. I told her to let go, and when I tried to pull away, she literally pushed me against my own car. It wasn't a hard push, but it was enough for me to realize the situation had turned physical. I yelled at her to leave or I'd call the police, and she kept screaming that she wasn't going to leave me alone until I gave her the money, that it was the least I could do, that she gave me everything and I owed her this. I took out my phone and called 911 while she kept screaming. When she heard I was talking to the operator, she finally left, running to her car that was parked on the street. The next day, I went to the police station and filed charges for assault and harassment. I also applied for a restraining order. I had to fill out a bunch of papers and explain the whole situation to a judge who fortunately understood the severity of the matter and granted me the temporary order. The permanent order was approved 3 days ago after a hearing where my mom didn't even show up. The crazy thing is that after all this, Richard took the twins to live with his parents in another state. My grandparents called me to tell me they'd talked to my mom and were deeply disappointed in her, that they finally completely understood why I'd cut contact and that they totally supported me. My mom is apparently living alone now in a small apartment. Richard left her because, according to my grandparents, he was tired of her desperate maneuvers and the constant drama. I don't feel sorry for her, honestly. I feel anger still, and disappointment, and probably a bunch of other emotions my therapist is helping me process. Part of me hates my mom for everything she did, for choosing them over me when I was just a kid, for showing up after all these years only because she needed money. But another part of me just feels a deep sadness for how all this was supposed to be, for the mother-son relationship I never had and never will have. The twins sent me a message a few days ago. I think they got my number from somewhere, telling me they didn't know the whole story, that my mom had never told them she kicked me out of the house, and that they understood why I didn't want to help them. It was weird to read that. I don't know whether to respond or not. It's not their fault what happened, but they're not my responsibility either. You know what I mean? My grandparents told me I did the right thing, establishing boundaries and protecting myself. My uncle feels guilty for telling my mom about my promotion, but I told him it wasn't his fault, that she would have found out somehow eventually. And the restraining order is for 3 years and prohibits any direct or indirect contact. So at least legally, I'm protected for now. I don't know what's going to happen after those 3 years, if she'll try to contact me again or if she'll finally understand there's no relationship to salvage here. What I do know is that I'm not going to let her manipulate me ever again, that I don't owe anything to someone who abandoned me when I needed her most. And that family isn't just about blood, but about who was there when things got tough. My grandparents are my family. My uncle is my family. The friends who supported me during these years are my family. She chose not to be a long time ago.